The world has turned and left me here redirects here. For the Vampire Diaries episode, see, the world has turned and left me here, open parentheses, the Vampire Diaries, close parentheses. Hi, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a time capsule episode of The Say Report. I'm one of your host companions, Devin Decker, and joining me, Sejan Sarah.
Hey, what's going on, man?
This is going to be a hard one.
Okay.
I'm just going to be honest about that. You probably already saw the title. You may have even read the synopsis. But what this is, it's a time capsule episode, and we'll get into what that means a little bit later. But the topic is the currently ranked 294th best album on Rolling Stone's 500 best rock albums ever as of 2020. Previously, it was 297 and then 299, but now it sits at 294. And honestly, I don't think that Weezer is going to go higher than 294 just because it's so convenient that it's the 294th ranked album in that rock album top 500 from Rolling Stone, and 1994 is the year that it released. It's that's just so kismet.
That's an interesting theory. I don't know. I was actually surprised to hear you say it was going up, not because of the quality of the album or anything like that. We'll get to that in a bit, but just because you have to imagine that list, like, there's more contenders every year, right?
Exactly. And it
like,
seems...
what is happening to some of those albums? Are we forgetting albums as the years go on, or are we as a collective conscious just losing to pieces of art to the ether?
I mean, there's a chance that we're losing pieces of art, or in reevaluating all 500 albums, they're like, that Weezer, that just slaps. And now when we say Weezer, we mean the Blue Album. But it is like a self-titled album, just Weezer. We only call it the Blue Album because of that blue background. And then it's become so nostalgic for the band Weezer, something straight out of Kicking and Screaming, the Noah Baumbach one, not the Will Ferrell one. I'm nostalgic for conversations I had yesterday. Their third release, 2 albums later, they totally ape this album cover design, but in front of a green background instead of a blue one.
So there's some history to this, right?
Yeah.
Like, so there's a reason for that. It's so for anybody that doesn't know, as Devin mentioned, this is the 30th anniversary of the Weezer Blue album, right? But then you'll note that only 3 albums later, we're talking about an album that came out in 2001. Which is not too unusual, but it's a little unusual, especially for a band that one might say as popular as Weezer. And the reason that it took them almost a decade to get to 3 albums, is because they broke up for a bit. Like broke up's a loaded term, right? Because there's a lot of implications that there was like issues, and as far as I could tell, it was just they decided that when the Blue Album was kind of getting them shit on, and then they did Pinkerton and suddenly everybody turned around and loved them, they made a decision at that moment where they were like, I don't know if we have more to say, and let's not fuck with this, and walked away for a few years. And it wasn't until they were asked to get back together in 2000, in the year 2000 for a rock festival. Something not like Bonnaroo or anything like that. Some probably larger than Bonnaroo but less known one. They were asked to get back together for a reunion, and they had such a good time together that they ended up creating the Green Album, so it was kind of a we're back album, which is why they redo that cover. And I think Weezer fans are going to correct me on this if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure at that point that's when we start referring to the Blue Album versus the Green Album, because that album is also titled just Weezer, but because of the green background, it becomes known as Weezer parentheses Green Album versus the original first album, which was Weezer parentheses Blue Album. There was also some stuff about changes in people in the band, not too many. A lot of the originals still come and play with them from time to time, even the ones that didn't even make it onto the first album, things like that. But like they basically are the same band, but it is almost a decade later, and they did break up for about 5 years in there, and then they get back together for the Green Album. So that there is a reason for that.
Right. And when it was 1999, where they had gone again their separate ways, but then Rivers Cuomo, kind of the heart, soul, everything of Weezer, I always thought it was different. I thought the Blue album hit
It
hard,
was
and
after the
then
Pinkerton tour in '97, is it not?
yeah,
After that?
that's that. But then by '99 they tried stuff. It's such a weird timeline, and I always thought that Blue album hit, and then Pinkerton, where Rivers was trying to say something more personal, ended up landing a little flatter. Even though personally I think it's the better of the two albums. Just showing my cards right at the beginning. We'll get to why in a bit.
But that's also
yeah.
But I mean, so historically, the Blue album comes out and they get fucking panned. It is one of those things where early listeners of Weezer fucking hate Weezer, but then they slowly start to develop this really powerful kind of younger audience that overtakes, and then eventually even those ones that even those like those guys that like wrote about how shitty the Blue album were kind of have to start like reevaluating some stuff. And then Pinkerton comes out, and for I don't know the story of Pinkerton being the flatter album. Pinkerton to me is the album that they're like, yeah, people actually like us this time.
Well, I mean, so Weezer's second album, Pinkerton, was released September 24, 96, received mixed reviews upon release, and sold poorly compared to their 1994 debut, primarily due to its darker, more abrasive sound. Following the tour, they went on hiatus, and then, he went back to Harvard University. Rivers Cuomo went back to Harvard University to finish his studies, and then dropped out to focus on songwriting again, and started the band Homie, which, I mean, that was not what we're talking about. We're trying to try to talk about the Blue album this episode because it's celebrating its 30th year. But as Sejan said when we were in the production meeting for this, let's open up the curtain for you, right? Some inside baseball, say report style. This is kind of going to be our Weezer episode. As opposed to, we've done other time capsule or very special episodes that are focused on albums, and even one that was focused on just one song that has never left the charts or hadn't left the charts for almost 20 years. So we have some history working in this realm, but something like Gordon, which is probably the closest analog to this episode, we talked about the album Gordon. And I will admit that's because I fully intend, even if I got to staple his eyes open and duct tape his hands to the microphone, that we're going to cover Maybe You Should Drive for its 30th anniversary. Now, that's selfish on my part. That's my favorite Bare Naked Ladies album, and we can go deeper on that. But when it comes to Weezer, God, I'm just ripping the Band-Aid off here. I have a lot of wins and losses related to this particular band. Which is the nicest way that I can say that. And I have been carefully cultivating my relationship to the Blue album for this episode so that we can celebrate the W's for Weezer and not the L's, presumably for Living in Beverly Hills. Which, I mean, Make Believe's a fine album. But, this is the stuff I'm working on as I'm going to the bathroom. Like, we're going to talk about Weezer on the show. What are the bits that I want to bring to it?
Yeah. Well,
but yeah, so that thing is that in retrospect, Pinkerton, that younger audience, people really do connect to that album. Personally, I think that it's my favorite album, and we'll get to my story and my connection to Pinkerton a little bit later in this. But the Blue album, everything that I read, like, critics at the time were blown away by what they had done with this album.
So Weezer starts out with a bunch of metal guys. They're all metalheads, right? And what happens is that they aren't finding success in various bands there. Cuomo has a band of his own. The other guys are all playing in other bands and things like that. And so they form Weezer. And what they do with Weezer is they bring metal to pop, and they end up with this they lean into power pop, I think is the technical genre that I think that qualifies as, right?
Wow.
But they lean into this idea that they're going to bring this like really thrashy, dirty sound that is maybe not as well produced. The vocals are not going to be much more than what you get from Cuomo and things like that, right? Like they're not doing they're not. There's definitely production being done, but they are purposefully not pushing it, right? Like, is the concept. You can argue all day up and down if you feel they succeed, but that's the idea, right? Is like they're going to bring that thrashier kind of more independent sound, I guess, to the pop concept. And that's how you end up with this like this sound of Weezer, right? And they're not the only bands to do it, and they're definitely not the last bands to do it, right? Like there's plenty of bands later on that take that exact same concept and do their thing with it. But like when Cuomo and his guys start playing as Weezer, they are not a success.
Oh no,
The
people
album
hate
might
them.
be, maybe that's what it is.
Yeah,
But like Weezer is famously not well received when Weezer first becomes Weezer. It is why they break up for 5 or 6 years there in the middle, is because they basically don't feel like they're succeeding as a band. Now, like I said, I have heard mixed things on Pinkerton. From everybody I've ever talked to in my life, Pinkerton is the best album they've ever put out. I have never heard anybody say Pinkerton was a bad album until you said it, as we recorded this show.
no,
So
and
like,
I
and
don't
that may
believe
very
them,
well
but
be that may very well be the way that it was received then. But by the time Weezer came back in 2001, which is where I come into the whole Weezer story and like the fandom of it. Like I say fandom, but we'll get to that as well. But like when I come around to listening to Weezer in 2001, by that point, Pinkerton is held up as a premier rock album. So like it wasn't long for that album to find its footing again. And maybe that explains why they come back in 2001. But like when Weezer first gets started, they are moving from metal into this power pop genre that they are not spearheading, but like people aren't succeeding in it. It's not a genre that there's a lot of people really like succeeding in at that time. And so as one of the first people, the first bands to start kind of breaking out of that, they don't make a lot of friends in the music scene critically, right? It
no, they
isn't
do
until
not.
there is this large like swath of audience that comes in and is like, no, like you guys can say all you want about like what their sound might not be, but this is what their sound actually is, and we like it, right? And they gain this following. Now the big thing to remember is that 294 is pretty indicative of where they land their whole career, right? We talk about there being enough people coming in and liking Weezer for it to change perspectives and blah blah blah, but it's not like they ever like rise to some level of major stardom, right? Like to Devin's point about hits and misses with Weezer, like Weezer for me like comes along in 2001 with the Green Album and Hash Pipe, and I can't even tell you what else is on the Green Album.
Island in the
That
Sun.
moment,
If I bring up
okay,
Out Cold, will you suddenly remember another song off of that
don't even know
album?
what Island in the Sun is at the moment. I'm sure if I heard it, I would remember. But that's not what I like.
That's fine. That's
What happens
completely
is the Green
understandable.
Album
Yeah.
comes out, and Hash Pipe is like really big. There's like they're like playing music videos of it at the X Games while fucking Tony Hawk is doing his thing and that shit. And like that's what I remember about like Hash Pipe. And like me and my friends kind of in that moment with it being on the radio all the time and us seeing the video on TV and in places and things like that, like Hash Pipe becomes a song that we kind of connect to. And then because of that, like the growth of like people around us listening to Weezer starts, and that's when I discover the Blue Album that doesn't have Hash Pipe on it, right? I get a hold of this album and I'm just like, man, this band is great. And I don't understand how this is the same band that did that song. And all of these feelings that I have about this album start to come from in that moment of getting this album in my hand again, almost a decade later, after they've kind of gone through their whole revamp and having a kind of different steez, but not really. Like they really do carry through their style. It's just that somehow they make it work in the 2000s when they couldn't in the 90s. And like that is when I'm discovering this album. And this album, the Blue Album, is maybe the only album of Weezer's I've ever owned, and I don't think I ever will buy another. I even when Pinkerton became kind of the album that everybody was talking about, that little shit in me. It's important we own up to these things, right? That's the reason I bought the Blue Album was because everybody around me was talking about like, man, the Green Album's okay, but you should listen to Pinkerton. And I was like, fuck that, I'm gonna go back even further. I'm gonna listen to the Blue Album, and that was what I listened to, right? I think even at that point it was even like Zach had like kind of gotten in on the bit too and bought it and like I think it was his disc technically, that kind of shit, right? But it was just that idea that like because everybody had gone back to Pinkerton, I needed to be the one that was going to go back even further, right? And I get a hold of this one and kind of love it. Like at that time, I love this album. It is probably one of my favorite albums at that time. And I follow Weezer a little bit more going forward. But in the Weezer fandom, there is a lot to talk about. The first thing is the controversy. I just put quotes around that because it's not like it's like a major one that like people like lose jobs over, but like the conversation at bars, whenever people talk about Weezer, whenever fans of Weezer talk about Weezer, is are they a better studio band or live band? And there are four camps. There are
Well,
like it's like there are
if I
there are
can
the
just
people that
weigh in
think that
briefly
they
before
are.
we go, if just like not what you're saying right there, I was today years old. Hate that fucking phrase, but I have to admit it. Researching for this episode, today was the day that I learned. It is February 29th, 2024 when we are recording this, just to put this time capsule where it belongs. I learned today that Rivers Cuomo did all of the guitar work on the Blue album. I did
Yeah,
not know that until
yeah,
today. I mean,
yeah.
March 10th is the
He didn't
official.
write it. Yeah, he didn't write it all, but he ended up re-recording it all because their actual guitarist at the time stepped away. There is one bit of background vocals from their new guitarist that comes in after that, but in terms of the actual guitar bits on the album, it's entirely him.
Yeah, which is insane because the guitar work on this album, I mean, we were joking about it today as we listened to it. There was a carpool into work today, and I'm like, we're going to listen to the Blue album. And so many tracks off of the Blue album wound up in Guitar Heroes and rock bands. So
Hmm.
then to think that, like, and that's all Rivers Cuomo who's doing that
Yep.
guitar work. And
Yeah.
when you're one of those bands where it's somebody who plays all the instruments, as we see so often nowadays in like the post garage band music scene. And I don't mean that it didn't exist beforehand, right? Steely Dan existed in the 70s and the 60s. So, like, there were definitely bands where it was one or two guys playing the majority of the musicality.
Well, because if you wanted to make a career touring, you needed a backing band.
You needed a band, yeah.
Yeah.
But for studio work, it's not completely out of the question for it to be like maybe one guy doing all of the music and then he has to have a band that plays behind him. Or them, right? Into Sing of Steely Dan, since I did invoke the Dan. So like, but then learning that about that, yeah, that's gotta be something when you're going out and playing and people are not really connecting with you. If
Yeah.
afterwards, like, cause it's like, oh god, so
If
in the
it's different,
studio we work,
yeah,
but
yeah.
like,
It's different music, right?
yeah,
Yeah. So you end up with these various camps about Weezer. You have the ones that think that they're better live than studio. You have the ones that think that they're better in studio than live. You have the ones that love them both, and then you have those ones out there that are those fans that are like this album, yes, that album, that, and that. They get real deep into it, talking about exactly kind of what Devin's getting at is who was playing with them when, what kind of sound people were capable of and going for. This idea that Rivers Cuomo has kind of gone in and out as a good guitarist, but like inevitably, like we are currently in a moment of him being considered a good guitarist, so like that's what we're going to talk about him as tonight, right? And I think at any point I personally would always talk about that, right? Because all of this leads to this idea of where Weezer truly lands in the grand like dogma of music, right? Like what he truly like what Weezer truly is as a group in the whole like zeitgeist of the music scene. This is the kind of band that people will use the phrase, this is this is the band that your favorite band listens to. This is the kind of music that your favorite musician listens to. This is the kind of stuff where if I were to talk about like Dave Grohl, I don't know if he like would be a Weezer super fan, but I guarantee you that if I asked him to play something from Weezer, he probably have a nice deep cut that he loves that he can play when he on his guitar, right? Like that kind of shit. Like you talk about the kind of stuff that what do other musicians love, and it is Weezer is in there, right? There is this respect in the music community for what they do. And again, going back to some of what Dev was talking about, this idea of like of Cuomo, like not by any type of like him wanting to play all of the music on that album, but they lost their guitarist. He just turns around and just records it all himself, and like that's the kind of like musician he is, right? And what he does with Weezer going forward, and everything that Weezer becomes and is and isn't in all of these ways, right? And they are pushing that envelope in so many different interesting ways to musicians that just never quite seems to translate to audiences. It does to some audience to the point where they are very popular, right? I'd be lying if I didn't say that they were, that they're if I said they were unpopular, right? But there is something about the idea that Weezer never quite rises to the top for any one group. Like, for example, all of the friends that I did have that were listening to Weezer when I was in high school, like junior high and high school, that idea that like we had a bunch of friends that were talking about music and movies all the time, and one or two of our group were listened to Weezer religiously. The rest were aware of Weezer. Again, I talked about things like Hash Pipe and stuff like that, right? But there were one or two people in our group that were like, we're gonna go see Weezer when they play the living room, right? And what was weird is in our group, we were going to everything, right? So generally we would all go if one or two of us was interested because it was just a place to be. And Weezer didn't even quite make that cut in our group, right? Like they went to Weezer, we didn't. Whereas like there were other, like I went to go see Brunt of It on like a fucking whim one night, and they ended up being one of my favorite bands afterwards. But I had never heard of them before. Like that kind of shit would happen all the time. But even when I kind of even knew who Weezer was, that I couldn't even bring it in me, and other people in our friend group couldn't. So like they've always kind of landed in that like that middling category of success. But it is because I think, and this might be something somewhat unique to music, is that like they're still worth listening to. There is so much going on that is worth listening to in these albums. It's just never enough to make it worth buying the album. It's never worth diving into the album like it is with other stuff, right? Like in some ways, like you think about the ways in which music doesn't really have that category of so bad it's good, right? And I don't even know if Weezer would really fall into that, but it's that idea that music kind of has its own oeuvre when it comes to what is bad and what is good. It has its own kind of sliding scale of what matters and what doesn't, in a way that doesn't quite translate to film or to visual arts in a lot of ways, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of like weird movies out there that people can find great art in, but like generally have to admit that's a bad movie. In music, that doesn't really happen. If somebody's a bad music artist, they're just a bad music artist and they don't get listened to. Like, I mean, there's like a whole genre of music called like outsider music, and you'll note in that genre as is that a lot of those people are not successful, right? There's also a lot to be said about how those people are broken in ways that make music sound good to them that don't necessarily sound good to us, and things like there's this weird kind of landscape in music where we don't really have that middle ground. So for a band to stick around for as long as Weezer has, there has to be something going on with them, right? Despite the fact that I couldn't name 5 people in my life that even know Weezer anymore, right? Like as a band, like they definitely have a fan base. I don't know where they are, right? That's the kind of place, that's the kind of world that Weezer has always lived in for me.
And that's completely understandable. I guess it's time for Origins of Devon. Before we go any further, though, I kind of like, and I always am kind of looking for an excuse to bring up the film Airheads from 1994, that they sort of feel that way in a weird way, because they're playing and they are drowning in a sea of grunge in the LA music scene. Nobody cares what Weezer is doing because like grunge is what's really working. So then they put together this demo tape, the kitchen tape or the kitchen demo. I had it ready to go, and then the kitchen tape. Yeah, I was right. The kitchen tape, and that's what is finally brings attention to them from David Geffen Company of Geffen Records, and they're like, we want to give these guys an album, and they're so like against everything that music is doing, like that production thing, that they're like, well, we don't want to have a producer on this. We just want it to be raw. And then like the Geffen Company's like, no, but you need a producer. And then Weezer gets to be like, I guess we'll choose Rick Ocasek from the Cars. Like, what an insane fucking conversation to have. Like, is the guy who like did the Cars stuff available?
But when you look at like, I don't know if this comes from Cuomo or from the band as a whole, but like if you look at how much old rock, 50s, 60s, 70s rock influences them, it doesn't surprise me that what the conversation probably is more like, if like it's like a dare, right? Like, if you're gonna make me have a producer, then fine, it has to be this guy. Like it's like asking for the golden toilet seat to be installed if one has to be installed, right? And somebody said yes. Somebody was like, sure, yeah, we'll give you that. And it's just like, oh, and at that point you're kind of stuck. You're just like, all right, I guess we're doing this then.
But just like the line, Weezer considered self-producing the album, but were pressured by Geffen Records to choose a producer. They decided on Rick Ocasek. Oh, okay, cool, right? I decided on having Adam Sandler as the producer of our Adam Sandler podcast. Like, that's just such a cool thing to get to do. And
Would
that,
love to know what else Kissick was doing at the
at the
time. Do you
time,
have
right?
that?
Because the
Because
cars
like, who
were
else is he
long
working with?
over.
Well, and if he's
Yeah,
producing music by that point, right?
yeah,
Like that's clearly what he moved into. So I'd be
yeah,
curious to know what other groups he kind of had a hand in.
right.
Because is this I want to know, is this par for the course for his kind of like thing, and that's why they end up with him, or is this so out of even his wheelhouse that it really is like lightning in a bottle? Like this will never happen again.
No,
Yeah,
I
I don't
mean
know.
he was a lot of production on the cars, so he did have the reputation for it, and that's
No,
why
yeah,
up and coming bands.
but as far as
would-
taking on
yeah,
a band doing weird music in LA in the 90s,
yeah.
was he doing a lot of other weird bands that were taking risky chances and
I mean,
playing metal pop or was he producing classical music and this was a weird thing for him to do, right?
let us know, you the listener, let us know if you would like us to do an episode focusing on Rick Ocasek, because I would do it right now. I would abandon the whole Weezer Blue Album thing if I hadn't put so much preparation into the episode. I would love to explore this weird thread that we have stumbled upon as to like what was he doing, because the Cars break up in 1988 and then he doesn't create music again until the year 2000. And by create music, I mean he doesn't play music, because he's involved in production from 88 through to at least 2001, because he's also the producer on the Green album, in terms of that everything old is new again. Let's be nostalgic for that first album. That, I mean, like, this album went triple platinum. The Blue album is...
So here we go. Sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
go ahead. Finish your thought.
No. This album went triple platinum. This is an album that, like... But as Sejan said, they were always kind of middling. They never hit the top. Like... It never sold, like, I think 37th is the highest it got on any of the charts as an album, and it sold triple platinum numbers. Like, that's incredible. That's an incredible thing to say. It was like, everybody likes this album, but, like, the band's okay. Buddy Holly got to number 2. I don't know if they've ever had a number 1 song, and that's because I didn't invest all my time into Weezer. I invested a lot of time into the Blue album.
I thought you were going to say you invested all your time into Rico Kasich.
No.
So to answer the question a bit, he definitely was doing a lot of really weird stuff in the 90s. Yeah. There's a lot of like, I mean, No Doubt's on this list, Bad Religion's on this list, and then add to that, like, he's doing a bunch of just really weird, cool punk stuff, glam punk, rock. Yeah, so this is right up his alley. So it actually, in a weird way, seems to make more sense now, right? Like, this is something that when they look at the kind of music that he is producing and his pedigree, it kind of fits right in with what Cuomo and I think the rest of the band is all on board for, right? Like, there's going to be a lot of talking about Cuomo as if he's kind of like the driving force behind this band, and for all I know, he very well could be. A lot of the problems that I have with my knowledge of Weezer come down to the fact that I think of Weezer, I think of Rivers Cuomo. There is no difference between the two. But there have been 7 other artists in this band.
Yes.
You know, if I think of Green Day, I think about Mike Dirnt. I think about Trey Cool. I do think about Billy Joe, right? Like, I think about those guys as like, oh yeah, they make up Green Day. If I think of Weezer, I think of Rivers Cuomo.
Yeah, and that's unsurprising. I mean, Pat Wilson has been there pretty much the entire time as well. But, I mean, the guitar player issues on the Blue album, and then they've had at least 3 bassists, of which I recently met somebody who was very proud of the fact that I've seen Weezer with all 3 bassists, and I'm like, I've only ever seen them with Scott, but that's stories for other later on down the line when we're talking about Weezer as a band, not just as album, or maybe it'll come, I don't know. This is such a hard one for me, because Sejan's whole story of finding Weezer in 2001, that is almost a mirror of how things worked for me, which is really crazy because, you know, I listened to this album on Spotify, even though I have a vinyl pressing of this, even though I have my old CD of it. I put it on Spotify, and one of the reasons I put it on Spotify was because I was very curious of the other music that would be recommended to me once the album finished. And, like, No Doubt was one of those bands that, like, here's freaking Tragic Kingdom. Here's a bunch of songs off of Tragic Kingdom. And I remember listening to those in 1994. Green Day, Dookie stuff. I remember listening to Green Day in 1994. I did not listen to Weezer in 1994. And I think, and this is a weird comment here, Rivers Cuomo kind of shot himself in the foot just a little bit by saying to Weird Al, take Buddy Holly out of the alternative polka off of Bad Hair Day. Because I know I have gone and listened to every band that's in the alternative polka, and if Buddy Holly had been there, I probably would have come to Weezer a lot earlier in my life. But
yeah,
that's
I
just
get the
like
impression that Cuomo shoots himself in the foot, business-wise, at least a few times throughout the history of Weezer.
Yeah, it's like Cuomo is our spirit animal. No, I kid. But yeah, no, it's just like one of those moments where like, yeah. So then 2001 rolls around. It is a band trip. That is just the fact of it. It's a band trip right when the freaking Green album comes out. So amongst the members of the high school band, there were a lot of people who worked at that radio station that I would later get a job at, and everybody seemed to have a copy of the Green album for this trip. And we went to like a big Strawberries or Tower Records because we went to Disney World for this band trip. It was the only band trip where we flew during my time in high school.
Didn't Pleasure Island used to have that 3-story Virgin Records? Maybe.
Yeah, maybe it was a Virgin Records. It was the one on Pleasure Island, downtown Disney sort of area. And we went there, and I remember holding a copy of the Green album in my hand and being like, should I buy it? Everybody else is listening to it. And then I'm like, you know what? Everybody else has it. I bet I can get someone to let me borrow their copy and listen to it on the plane ride home. So instead I went home with Cartoon Planet or Cartoon, just like a CD of 52 TV theme songs. Origins of Devon.
Nice.
So like
really good.
Really like just this wonderful thing that I picked up. And then on the plane ride home, I did ask somebody, can I borrow your copy? He's like, yeah, man, I'm really excited for you to listen to it. And I put it in my actual Sony Discman because my father had one at work and it was gifted to me for Christmas. Threw it in my Discman, listened to it. The song that stuck with me instead of Hash Pipe or Island in the Sun is Photograph. And the reason that stuck with me is the hokey, corny, kind of like lame as hell. If you want it, you can have it, but you gotta learn to reach out there and grab it. Yeah,
That's a song that pops into my head all the time, and I didn't know that it was a Weezer song.
Yeah, clearly, that's
you. It's like you've solved a mystery for me that I wasn't quite trying to solve, but thanks.
Yeah, no, you were putting Blue's Clues all around, but you didn't know the Photograph, the second track off of the Green album, was the answer. And like that was just so goofy to me.
And for the record, when I say that song, I do just mean that riff,
that specific part of it.
Riff.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like I couldn't tell you anything else in that song.
Yeah, and that's the second song of the album, and I heard that, and then I listened to the whole thing, and I'm like, it's good, but I don't really see the appeal that like has everybody losing their minds on this band trip where I'm surrounded by like high school age musicians and like this is so blah, 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 blah. Everybody's losing their mind over it. And I'm like, okay. But then later that same year, I am introduced to the films of Kevin Smith. And specifically Mallrats is the one that I connect to. And Mallrats, the credit song is a song by Weezer, and it's Suzanne, and I had just won a MP3 player at my hockey banquet. Like it was the raffle prize, the big raffle prize was an RCA MP3 player. I bought one ticket and somehow won this thing. And one of the first songs I remember, someday, I still have the flash card that was like huge that plugged into that. I would love to maybe try to open that up and see the other tracks that are on that, because I feel like that would give me a lot of insight into the person that I am. But the Weezer song that brought me to Weezer as like, this is a band that is doing something that connects with Devin Decker was Suzanne from the Mallrats soundtrack. As far as I can tell, the only other place it ever appeared is like Dusty Gems and Rarities, the like extra disc that was released for the 10th anniversary of the Blue album. And that song, God, Suzanne, I listened to Suzanne while I was playing video games all the frickin' time.
So when you listened to the Blue album on Spotify, what Did you listen to the deluxe
No, 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 no,
version
no.
that is
I
the
only
version?
listened to the 10-track, 41-minute
So
album.
Suzanne is on the deluxe version.
Yeah,
So
it is.
that's
Because that
yeah, yeah.
second disc is the Dusty Gems and Rarities or
Oh, is it
Oddities.
really?
Yeah,
It just
that's what the
it
second
could
disc is. It's just called the disc 2 on Spotify. Yeah.
okay. All
So
right. Well, there you go.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
so there's that whole thing. So Suzanne, I knew it from that. I downloaded it off of probably Napster, like OG Napster is where I probably got my copy of Suzanne that I loaded onto my MP3 player. I listened to it using Winamp. Yes, saying all of these things is aging me rapidly. I feel my bones turning to dust. But I would listen to it.
Oh man, you got one of those Sony Walkmans that preloads the song so that it doesn't skip, anti-skip. Yeah.
I had a mini disc, man. I didn't, but a kid in middle school did, and he was insufferable about it. But yeah, so I remember I cannot play Sonic 3 and Knuckles or any of the ones that have the like 3D isometric view bonus levels where you got to collect the blue spheres without Suzanne immediately coming into my mind. Because the first time I beat that game with all the Chaos Emeralds for Sonic was on an emulator on the computer in the back of the living room and listening to Suzanne like just on repeat. And then, of course, that girl called, as I referenced with Terranigma, and it all went away. So then, like, I love Suzanne. I love that song. That's probably one of my favorite Weezer songs. Like, easily top 3. If I ever had to like make one, I know that it would be in the top 3. Then the Bare Naked Ladies, you can hear all of this in Gordon, how the Greatest Hits album comes out in 2001. And then I go back and I discover all this band. And then, Everything to Everyone comes out and I'm still on that road. So then when it comes time to go on the third band trip, this time to Montreal, Canada. No, was it? No, it was Ohio. It was in Ohio. Sorry. We went to the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a good time. When
you
it
still
comes,
check your passports for some reason.
yeah, I think we went through Canada to Ohio. It was weird. But I stopped. I'm like, the day before, I'm like, Mom, we got to go to Walmart and I got to buy a copy of the Blue Album by Weezer because I want that to be my band trip CD. Like, I want that to be what I'm spinning and what, like, becomes the sort of soundtrack of this. And that's the first time I owned a copy of the Blue Album. First time I owned a Weezer album, and I like kind of fell in love with it. That first time I heard My Name Is Jonas, I like it's one of those songs that, like, even though it was in Guitar Hero 3, it was never a single. The singles off of this album are Undone, Buddy Holly, and Say It Ain't So. In that order. Like, the fact that their lead single was Undone is insane to me. In terms of what the music industry was 30 years ago.
Well, and so to talk a little bit about like Undone, right? And like why that song is a fucking wild first choice, right? Like, and this goes back to what I was talking about with like the weird actual musicality of that album that like if you're just a casual listener to, like, you wouldn't get it. But like the entire fucking thing's about the Cold War. Like, it's this wild thing that Cuomo does where he like writes the like story of the Berlin Wall coming down as if it was like a house party, and he's like singing as like this lonely faction trying to like break through, and it's the craziest fucking breakdown. If you listen to the way Cuomo talks about what that song is actually about, is wild. And like that idea that is what is then put out as their first single. I mean, it goes right in line with everything we said about him, so, about the band so far, and about their choice of making this album and how they wanted it to be this like thing, this like meaningful artsy thing to them, and like didn't care if anybody else got it. As far as I can tell, didn't care if anybody else got it. And then like a lot of people did, right? That idea that like at first people didn't, but then a lot of people did. And so there's this like weird moment with that. And then, as I said, like, when I come around, like, people then, like, looking at the Blue Album and turning their nose up at it because, probably because we were kids and we were shitty, like I was getting at before. So I, like, have this story in my head of Pinkerton being the more successful or popular album because I was surrounded by a bunch of music snobs, apparently.
Apparently.
Including myself.
I mean, and music snobs at that time in our life were also people who were, like, probably influenced heavily by MTV. And the Undone music video is not anywhere as engaging as like Buddy Holly with its Happy Days like references and parodies and everything. It's Spike Jones who does both of them. What?
Right, but isn't Undone the one that ends up with two? I might be thinking of a different video. There's a famous song like this at that time where they do one video and the MTV is like, we're not going to play this. This is the weirdest thing ever. So they do another version of the video and it's just them just staring into a camera and it's like boring as hell. And that's the one that ends up getting all the airplay.
We actually talked about this one.
But it's
we
it's
talked about the two of them.
Sorry.
I don't remember the name of the song, but we talked about the fact that we've talked about this song before on an episode of the show, and I wish I could remember. But it's not
that exact story, but it's that idea, right?
Yes.
Is that first video comes out and it is pretty stock standard fares for MTV, essentially. Yeah.
I mean, If It Makes You Happy by Sheryl Crow is one that definitely hits that, because there's the one where she's just in the black and white room, and then there's the one where she's in the museum, and she's like an endangered species as a independent woman.
I guess it's more of like this happened to a lot of bands. They had their good video that by the late 90s you could probably get as like a bonus like MP4 like on the disc if you put it into the computer, like the Foo Fighters had a phenomenal like secret video like list on one of their albums that I loved. But then they had the MTV video that was the like sanitized, probably more boring, not much going on version of the video that could at least get some airplay.
Yeah, it's not no one's gonna call in Pretoria and be like, what the hell are you showing this? I mean Peoria. I referenced the Family Guy country from but Peoria, middle America. So that album, that's Spike Jonze, and everybody talks about how well made a video it is. It's been redone for the Africa music video. It's Weird Al and his band, so that might be something you're thinking about as well, because Undone has been recreated.
That might be why I'm thinking about the redo of the video. Is I was thinking it was a situation of like we want a boring version, but no, it's the redo. You say this thing about that with Weird Al after the idea that they asked Weird Al to not do one of their songs in the 90s. So like that idea that like did they realize their mistake? Is that what happened? And then they did this thing?
Let's be honest. Rivers Cuomo was suffering pretty heavy depression in the wake of what happened with the Pinkerton album. And again, that's all on how he was interpreting it and his own self-worth based upon how other people reacted to that album. And it's all very valid, right? And he's clearly picked himself up from there and recovered to the fact that the Weezer has been active for 4 decades of playing music. That's just impressive as hell. But then you look at like where he was, it was one of those situations where he goes with Al, he's like, he doesn't want his music anywhere at the time. He's so upset with the reaction from the industry that like, even though he had given that permission to Weird Al to use it, because it's recorded, you can go out there, you can hear it with Buddy Holly in there from the demo tapes that Weird Al had done. And then when Cuomo was like, I really just don't want that in there. And it's like, okay, no, I will do that. Because Weird Al, famously hyper respective of the artist that he is covering or parodying, because he does both.
I think there's only one story of an artist ever getting mad at him for doing what he does, and it wasn't even his fault. Right?
Yeah, and it's that same album, and it was the producer said, yeah, he's fine with it. Yeah, it was
a producer who lied to him essentially, and like he got so upset by the act that he ended up like sending Coolio like dozens of roses, right?
Yeah. Amish Paradise, and then when they both had the same hairstyle at the Grammys later, that like there were some good moments that came from that. And Coolio, rest in power, he even did say eventually he realized that he had overreacted at the time. His ego got in the way of him seeing something that ultimately led to more people finding his song and its actual message.
At the very least was harmless, right?
Yeah.
Like you can, we can say all we want about how that led certain of us on this very podcast to go listen to Coolio, but but the reality is even if that wasn't the story, right?
Yeah,
it was a harmless thing to let Weird Al to like parody your music for one song,
right? But again, I mean, we're not here to talk about Gangsta's Paradise because I could do a full hour on that as well and what happened there. I mean, Dangerous Minds. Right? AKA working title, My Posse Don't Do Homework. God, the '90s were a weird, wacky,
I
magical
love
time.
I love the fucking 90s music scene. I really
Yeah.
do. Well, and like and doing episodes like this where we get to talk to each other about these kinds of albums and our histories with them and what we thought these albums were growing up and finding out that we were completely wrong, or like
Right.
finding out that that these albums were more important than we thought. Because the other thing is that like because of this history of me thinking about the Blue Album in this way of being the more kind of frowned upon one as it was in my friend groups,
Mm-hmm.
I was also the only one listening to
Two.
this album, and
Mm-hmm.
Zach, right?
Yeah.
Like we were the only ones listening to this album. We didn't have when we would friends would talk about Weezer, we'd put on Buddy Holly, we'd get weird looks, right? And it's just like in retrospect, it's that stupid thing that kids do, where because they haven't heard of it, no one has, right? I mean, I say kids do, everybody does that shit nowadays, but that idea that you're surrounded by people at the time that talk to you like that and shape your way that you think that you look at this stuff, and it has formed my entire kind of thing, my entire kind of view of Weezer all kind of comes from this idea of like the ways in which I've interacted with the fans and the music that has made it to me through radio, through MTV, through they were really big on YouTube in the early days of YouTube because they did a bunch of videos with the Muppets and things like that, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yeah.
there's just this whole thing where like every time I have come up to Weezer, it has been in this very formatted view, right? Like there's always been like people have always kind of brought Weezer to me. I have never gone looking for Weezer. I mean, you talk about Suzanne on the Mallrats album, and you say that, and I like forgot that that was on the Mallrats album, but the second that you mentioned it, I hear it in my head and I love it, and now I want to go listen to it again, right? Imagine if I had really deep dove into the Mallrats soundtrack and like fell in love with Weezer that way, right? Like this whole idea that Weezer is a band that just ends up being brought to you, and the ways and we talk about this all the time.
Oh
The
yeah.
context in which art is brought to you really does shape the way you take it in. So the idea that I never went out looking for more Weezer leads to me kind of having this very warped view on what this band is, and I don't know if I'm ever gonna like come around to Weezer. I'm not saying I'm going to sit back now and listen to all their music because I was wrong, but this idea that this is how taste has been formed in me, right? Like this is an element of my entire like steez, like the way that I am, the way that is all shaped like all like visualized in the ways in which I was brought Weezer, and because of the ways it was brought to me, never quite fell in love with it. And now I'm wondering if I'm the odd man out, right? Except I know I'm not, because again, I can't point to anybody around me that like loves Weezer in the ways in which some people love, just Green Day, just because we talked about it earlier, and they just had an album come out that did really well. Like the ways in which people still talk about those bands, I don't hear that all the time. In fact, the Weezer stuff, a lot of the time I'm hearing nowadays is stop remaking songs.
Well, I mean that TL album. That could be a whole other album there too. And I just had another discussion with somebody about their cover of Africa and how it is very kind of karaoke. Where when they did Rosanna, when someone asked them on social media cover Toto, and then they do Rosanna, their cover of Rosanna is excellent. But then when the person's like, "No, I meant Africa. What is wrong with you?" When I said Toto, I meant this song. It's like, oh, you got to tell us that. We did the Toto song that we wanted to cover, not the one that you were magically asking us to do by saying cover Toto.
Well,
Like,
let's do a terrible thing here and keep the mythos of our version of Rivers Cuomo going for a second. But like this idea that everything we've seen from him so far, what we've talked about in the episode, him first of all being told to do Toto, knowing they meant Africa, and being like, "Fuck you, we're gonna do Rosanna," and then coming back and being like, "No, I meant Africa," and then they do a boring version of Africa. Like it all feels like it's almost pointed, like "fuck you" in particular.
yeah, I mean that was a sad moment for me with Weezer. This is one of the rare L's I will talk about because people were kind of losing their minds over that cover of Africa, and I'm like, I mean, it's a cover of Africa, but it's not like when you say Weezer covered Africa, you expect there to be some of that Weezer there. Not just a very good recreation of the song.
Yeah. For me, for instance, I had not realized it had been a cover for the first couple of times I had heard it. Maybe some of that's on me or whatever, but like I listened to radio stations out here that play all sorts of music. Like they're pretty wide berth, especially because Weezer is considered an older band now, guys. I hate to say it, but they do fall into the oldies.
We are
On
talking
some
about
stations.
a 30th anniversary of an album, CJ.
Right. But because of that, like the stations that they play on out here, the first couple of times I had heard it, I just assumed it was Toto, right? And it wasn't, and a lot of that is also because of the way things are credited. Sometimes people will say things like, as originally performed by Toto or things like that. So like, there was just this whole kind of moment when I realized that I had been listening to Weezer play Africa. That just completely kind of broke my brain for a little bit when it was first explained to me that was not the original version but a cover of it, right? Like that, yeah. I understand exactly what you mean. Like that idea that like. I wish I had listened to it and thought for a second, like, oh, this isn't the original version. I wonder who this is. Or something like, oh, this sounds so good, but sounds like an up. It doesn't even sound like it's like up-resed or updated.
Yeah, it is.
Like it doesn't sound like a better copy. It just sounds like the original print of Toto's Africa.
Which honestly, on some level, that is also very impressive.
That's
like I don't want to route that down.
It almost feels purposeful, right? Like it feels almost pointed at that point.
Yeah, it's one of those situations. And then just to complete the circle, Toto covered Hash Pipe, or what did they? There was Hash Pipe or Island in the Sun, something off the Green album. Let me check just to make sure. I want to do it. It is Hash Pipe. They covered Hash Pipe. And it's fantastic because this Toto is the Porcaro brothers, and they're one of the greatest musical families, group of studio musicians. They played on almost everything that they were on the Thriller album, for Christ's sake. Yeah, their cover of Hash Pipe is going to be pretty good.
Well, interestingly, also did some metal work, right? Didn't they play some as far as backing artists go? Like they've definitely played some thrashier stuff.
Yeah, they're studio musicians, and you want the best studio musicians, you hire a Porcaro, because they'll bring their brothers. It's just like one of those situations. So so that cover of Hash Pipe by them is just, and it really completes that whole circle of everything that we've been discussing here, of almost to biting their nose off to spite their face. It's just that situation, and of course of the Man Rivers Cuomo that we are building right now. So I listened to the Blue album and I stopped there because I really liked the Blue album, and most of the people were like, it's good, but it's no Pinkerton, and their new stuff is much better than their old stuff. Or the people are like, their old stuff is so good you don't need to bother with it. I'm like, you know what? I liked this album. I liked this Blue album. I'm not going to go anywhere further than that. There was a brief time where, when I was a heartbroken sophomore, Pink Triangle was something I would work out frustration to. I'll admit that. I completely not understanding any deeper meaning there, but just that understanding of there's a girl I like and I cannot have her for circumstances that are outside of my control, right? I was a freaking 16-year-old kid. I had my heart broken for the first time.
So that's another thing that really kind of becomes a nail in the coffin for a lot of people with Weezer, right? Is that they do fall back specifically lyrically. They fall back on a lot of really problematic, tropey, male lead singer bullshit. Like the idea of the even on this very album, what's the one that's all about I love you, I want to be the only one to make you laugh.
No one else.
That
track 2.
Someone else, right?
You can tell me afterwards, after we record this, there's somebody from our collegiate times who one night at their dorm room was like, this is what I want. This is what I want in the girl that I eventually falls for me. And I'm like, oh, okay, cool. And then it was years later when I was listening to it again, and I'm like, oh, this song is hyper toxic. For me, I always that was a song I liked, but I kind of liked it as a situation of not the possessive nature of the lyrics, because the lyrics are hella possessive, hella, you are mine, I am super controlling, your world begins and ends with me. If I'm not around, you basically don't exist. If I'm not around, all of the other characters should be saying, where's Poochie? It's that level of just... But to me, it's finding a girl who can't laugh and then being that person who makes her laugh for the first time and has the guy who was the funny guy, like that part of it was appealing, right? She doesn't laugh at anything, but then for some reason she finds me
Well, that's
funny.
the problem with this shit, man. Is
Yeah.
that that's how all this shit works. Is there is a level, a very
Yeah.
shallow level on which it does work for you. And the problem is that people take that and then they let it sink in, and that ain't good.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, we'll talk afterwards about who that particular person was, though when I reference
Was it
someone.
me?
No, it
I'm
wasn't
not
you.
gonna sit
I
here and
swear,
act like I was not
if
guilty
it
of
were
this kind of
you,
shit.
I
Like,
would say, Sejin, here is the father. You are the father. I would have Maury Povich's ghost possess me and call you out on it. I promise you that it is not you.
oh man,
I would not do
but
that
yeah,
to you.
like,
I mean, I would do that to you. I would not hint at it. We've known each other long enough that I would just be like, I mean, I remember when this happened between us. And then,
right.
guess what? You would have the thing that I did that you could, smack back at me. And the volley would begin. Oh, God, that's how the show's going to end, right? The final say report is just us stop being nice and start being real. Oh God. But yeah, so that whole thing of it, and then like listening to that song again today, it's like, yeah, this is, but also you need to think about like the age where they are. And also the fact that like there was a moment with this episode where I'm like, did Weezer create the alternative scene? And that was an insane thought on my part. Like that was like the craziest thing. And I very quickly proved, no, they didn't, you fucking moron. But did Weezer...
No, we all know Sublime did that. Shut up.
But what Weezer definitely laid some foundation stones for, maybe even at least one of the cornerstones, is for emo music. And that
I would place some more... I would say that emo music in general is built on the foundation of pop punk.
Right.
And that's really where these guys fall in, is they really created a power pop, like metal, like basically they took otherwise alternative music and made it pop music. So like pop alt, I guess, would be the big genre that they really kind of, you could call them one of the founding fathers of.
It's one of the quotes from the reviews of the album. Big, vibrant pop rock that would inspire thousands of emo kids.
Yeah.
And then,
well, yeah, but like emo is definitely built on that, right? But there is something. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely something to the lyrics, like we just talked about. There is definitely something to some of the more thrashier music. The idea of having this type of voice over thrashier guitars definitely bleeds into emo and stuff. So, like, yeah, for sure. But it also bleeds into other genres as well.
Oh, definitely,
right?
Yeah.
Like,
it's the big one is that NME. What does NME stand? New Musical Express, the British music, film, gaming, and culture website. It was a magazine at the time. They credit this album as a formative influence on melodic emo. That was the thing where I read it and I'm like, now that one I can co-sign on. I can understand how this, because like listening to this album as the multiple times that I have listened to it over the past week, when we're like, we're going to do a time capsule, we're going to do it on Weezer. It's the 30th anniversary. Might as well do it. Was just like, these guys in 94 were singing about the kind of shit that like men were feeling, but were not vocalizing at all. Like it was still a be tough, don't feel your feelings kind of world. And then I look at like the third one, The World Has Turned and Left Me Here. No, not the Vampire Diaries episode. With like, I just made love to your memory 1,000 times in my head. And then the lyric of like, I had a conversation with your wadded photograph and you listened, or maybe you didn't. Like those are real things that like, I know people have done after a breakup, right? Be nostalgic for it, or like, try to figure out where they went wrong, maybe looking at a photo of that girl. Though like now it'd be like social media and blah, 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 blah. And again, you talk about like, there's a shallow, relatable area there, but then like you sink into that mud and it kind of goes into like incel nature or like really gross misogyny.
But like, I think the key thing to point out here, and this is not me forgiving it or any of that shit, but pointing out that we're not saying Weezer were the ones guilty of this.
No,
we're
not
saying
at all.
music was guilty of this,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, like I was about to joke and say like this is kind of what I was saying before about how this is what your favorite band is, right? And like you point out like the emo scene and all of that and how that was influenced. I immediately was going to say, well, I bet you if you looked at Brian Ross right now, I bet you if you asked him, you know, does he know a Weezer song? Just like I was talking about with Dave Grohl, I bet he would. And literally one of the first things listed on their Wikipedia under musical influences is fucking Weezer.
Yeah.
Like it is right there, right? So like yeah, like it goes back to that idea that like yeah, I'm not surprised that there is a bunch of emo stuff that credits them as like what inspired them. I just also think you could point to a lot of other like alt rock
Oh,
artists of like the 2000s 2010s that would point to Weezer and say like I kind of liked what they were doing, like, and like it was an album I had in my car at the
yeah.
very least, right?
I mean, the thesis
My
that I
Chemical
came
Romance probably
to,
the same.
like the hypothesis I came to, the theory that I would want to test with this is that this is one of the first albums that is unapologetic about what it has to say. Like this is the stuff we're gonna say, and if you don't like it, I don't give a fuck. I'm Rivers Cuomo. If you don't like it, we don't give a fuck. We're Weezer. Like, and there very well could be other albums that are like that came before this.
I would say pop, right? Like you're
Yeah.
talking about in that genre because like you're literally talking about the entire punk scene at this
Yes.
point.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Like and like but I mean even but there are rock but here's the thing. That is something that musical artists in general have been saying for as long as musical artists have been fucking artists. I mean like we could go back and fucking look at Amadeus and find notes of this in both Beethoven and right? Like there's this so that attitude is nothing fucking new.
Right.
It's just that what they are doing is they pull it off as a popular band in the studio system, right?
Yeah. I guess that's what it is. It's like it's something mainstream ish, like it's mainstream adjacent that people are listening to where he's saying stuff that like you're not gonna hear this from, you know, the bands that are like, it's so cool to be on drugs and fucking women. Like
Right. I mean, like it is a more inward like again. There are
yeah.
definitely artists that were like this before,
Right.
but they didn't fall into this genre. They didn't play like this. They didn't sing like this. Right. I mean, like, you know, it's a threshold moment in rock, and then there's tons of those throughout the history of rock and roll, throughout the history of music. There's these moments where somebody comes in and does something that's different. It breaks the mold, and then like everybody piles on and does it for the rest of the time. Right. Like that's how music works. We're just pointing to one of those moments, and you're not wrong that Weezer's the head of it, like
Yeah.
at the head of a lot of that movement.
I mean, in the garage, I remember like the first time I sat and listened to that song, didn't just hear it, and was like, wow, I can't believe that like this is something they were singing about in 1994. I'm
Well, I
like,
remember there being parts of In the Garage and Holiday right after it. Like
yeah,
those two songs, like so they come right after Say It Ain't So, right? Which is like this huge kind of hit off of the album for me. Like Say It Ain't So is the one that I see in movies. I think by the time is Rock Band out yet? Probably
yeah,
not.
but
But
it is
like
in Rock
but
Band.
but it does but it is the song that shows up as one of the very first songs you play in Rock Band, right? Like it's
Yeah,
one of the ones
I
that
think it's the
anybody that touched
fourth
that
song.
system probably played, right?
Yeah,
It's meaning it was one of the only ones unlocked when you first bought the game, right?
right.
So like there's this whole idea so Saying Ain't So becomes this thing that is kind of emblematic of that album. And I don't know if we've ever talked about this before, but that idea of the back half of the album, like this is known in recording and stuff too. Like there's a real danger in people not listening to the end of an album, and in that there's different philosophies out there about what you do with the structure of your album in order to remedy that, or if you know people are going to do that, you put the good stuff at the top, right? There's a reason why the first song is the first song, the second song is the second song. Lo and behold, people put thought into how they design this shit, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so In the Garage and Holiday are where this album for me is that kind of dangerous, I might not finish the album today point, for a lot of reasons. First of all, at that point I've been listening for 20 minutes. At that point I've heard Saying Ain't So, Buddy Holly, and My Name Is
I've
Jonas,
heard
the
the
three
singles.
right
Well,
like
and Undone. You like you've
and Undone,
yeah,
right? Yeah, oh yeah, Undone's in the top of there too, right? Yeah, so like that, like I've quote unquote heard the album, and In the Garage and Holiday for me get really interesting now, interesting in the back of the day, kind of turned me off because of how thrashy they actually get,
Yeah.
right? Like there's these moments in both of them where you just hear a very different type of not a different type of guitar, but a harder guitar than we've gotten even so far. And it just isn't, it wasn't for me, right? I was listening to it today and I was just like, man, this is wild. Like this really is showing that influence of like the metal music that they were like coming from, and like the kind of gross, like probably, I mean, not least of which because of the equipment that they owned, right? What pedals do they already have that they're going to keep playing with? That kind of stuff,
Yeah.
like these kinds of things that shape this band's sound that are legitimately just because, like, yeah, they're not going to go out and buy a whole bunch new set of fucking equipment just to sound different. They're just going to keep sounding the same, but do what they can with it, and that's how you get some of the best music. And like, yeah, there's just moments in those songs that just really fucking throw me to the point where I might not finish the album at that point.
Well, for me, and this is, I'll admit it, since we've already talked to that, I mean, Say It Ain't So is like that big moment. And then it's kind of like this epilogue, those last three songs. In the Garage really became a big part of that once I listened to it and was like, man, this is like such a good narrative. It's so visually striking. The music really supports everything that's going on. I remember the first time that like my mother found me listening to that song, she's like, oh my God, does the person in this song kill themselves? And I'm like, no, where do you get that? And then like listening to it, I'm like, oh, is the music is kind of menacing. That like I understand. Like the lyrics are telling this kind of story about where the garage is where he feels safe, but when you put the music there, I can see how at the end of it he's sitting in his car with it running in that garage.
Well, it doesn't paint a great picture, even if it's not about suicide. It's not about a good life. Like that's the thing, and this kind of gets to what you were saying about the whole album, kind of being the song that is much more like introspective and dark, but with all of this pop music around.
Yeah, I mean, you say that, but like that garage reminds me of the dev layer, the studio where I am right now. Right, I don't have a Dungeon Master's guide. I was never really a Dungeons and Dragons dude, but I got Wolverine.
I'm gonna be flat out honest with you right now, and this is not because of anything direct or specific. Fine. This is entirely opinion. But I have always read that song as a kid hiding in the garage from his abusive arguing parents.
Oh, definitely. I mean, that's it. Or from abuse at school, the garage is his fortress away from everything that bothers him.
That's a pretty dark.
That's dark.
Pretty dark overtone to that poppy song. Like that. Like that's what you're talking about.
But there are a million people who don't have a sanctuary from the storm. So I guess I focus on that silver lining for that character in it. Because there are some people who don't have a garage where they can run and feel safe.
But you can't be surprised.
But no.
Listens to that and goes, "Is this about suicide?"
Right? No, and it was just like, but that's because I had listened to it so many times and built my own narrative to it. Right? It's one of those things. So then it's that perception thing that we everybody lives in their own version of the world. That is the craziest, truest thing, because I cannot know how you perceive things, Sejin. On like the deepest level, you and I might look at a circle and see different shapes just because of how our perception of this world works, right?
I am not high enough for this conversation now. Keep going, though. How do we know?
Do you do drugs for this conversation?
How do we know it's truly a Blue album, Devin?
Yeah,
how do we
right?
know what Blue looks like?
Exactly, right? It's one of those situations where like, but it is so like, obviously nobody listens to a song. And I think it's one of the best parts about music and conversations about music is when you have that conversation with somebody who's like, oh yeah, in the garage, it's about like a box of comic books that lives in the garage. And
she's like a virgin. It has to be about how big the guy's dick is, right? Because she's taking it and it feels like she's a virgin.
I thought it was about her losing. No, that's True Blue. I don't tip, right? Reservoir Dogs.
There we go.
And it connects to Buscemi, which connects to Sandler, which, Meyerowitz story is coming next month, this is a time capsule. So this is probably released after that. Anywho, yeah, it's just one of those situations, a holiday, but then Only in Dreams is that unfortunate song that I know, despite how many times I would say I've listened to this album, I have not given a fair shake. A lot of the times, this would be an album that I would put on, like, while I was driving home late at night, And then I'd be good till holiday, and then Only in Dreams would start, and I'd start to fall asleep. And I'm like, I gotta change it. I can't listen to this because I will fall asleep while driving my car. And
I mean, I thought you were gonna say because you got home. Like that's the other big
that's
thing.
the
Like
other thing.
sometimes
Well,
it's
that
not
was
even
my.
yeah. Sometimes it's not even a feeling like I don't want to listen to this. Sometimes it's literally I put this album on. I have a 20-minute drive. I don't listen to the back 30 minutes or well, that would be an insanely long album for the time. But like, I don't listen to the back 10 minutes because I got to the 20-minute mark, right?
Right, exactly.
Like, and that happens in so much music where then people think about things, and this is where the concept of like B-sides came from, right?
Right.
Like you don't you like yeah, we're gonna put this on the back of the tape because like nobody's gonna get through it.
I mean, honestly, those three songs together, 4, 3:30, and then 8 minutes. So like that's 14 minutes of this album. So you're even getting, and it's 41-minute album. So like you're going like 25 minutes, and then it's like, and then dropping off. Like those first 7 songs, I mean that's an album. Like that's what albums used to be. So like the idea of them being B-sides or other stuff. But I love In the Garage. I love Holiday. But it is Only in Dreams that I will admit, like, and then listening to it, to make sure I heard it, I'm like, but like the stuff that they're doing with like just the guitar solos and when they're just kind of jamming at the end of it is really, really good. And I kind of feel sad that I've never given it its proper.
Yeah, I mean, you know, like so this album is, like I said before, musically pretty insane, pretty important, and like pretty huge, and because of that, pretty popular, right?
Yeah.
Like we've talked at length about how, despite my misgivings about nobody around me listening to it, as seems to be the case with everything with Weezer, just because no one in my life was doing it doesn't mean the world wasn't, right?
Right. Which I guess kind of brings me to why this is something that I would want to have a discussion about. Why I'm like, I know that you might not have that, but so I find the Blue Album, 2003 on that band trip, pretty much only listening to the Blue Album, occasionally listening to Suzanne. I burned someone on the dorm floor's copy of Dusty Gems and Rarities, so I have like Mikkel and Carly, and that, I mean, that's a heartbreaking story, what happened to them, and just everything. So I have that, but the Blue Album is pretty much where it begins and ends, because Beverly Hill comes out, Make Believe, and I'm just like, I'm not, like, this band has changed. And that was something that was really happening while we were in college. Like, Green Day reinvented themselves as more, like, popular than punk, right? Because they were always kind of pop-punk, definitely punk-pop, but then they kind of became pop-punk.
2005, they do it in 2005. With the release of American Idiot, when they go full on like what's the word?
Mainstream
story album.
Yeah.
No, in the making of the album.
Oh, the making of the album. It's like a rock opera.
Rock opera, yeah, like full on rock opera with like full orchestra backing them on most tracks. Like they create an album unlike any they had done before. Reinventing is it doesn't even begin to describe.
Doesn't even begin to describe.
Yeah.
And then weirdly, a lot of other bands in the 90s, it felt like that's kind of what they followed suit and did as well. That like we don't always have to be what we were in order, and we can still be popular.
When did that "It's My Life" by Bon Jovi come out? John Bon Jovi specifically, right? Because that was part of what he did.
That was like I think that was 99 or 2001.
Yeah, 2001, but it's in that era. It's in that 2000s window. Yeah.
So Weezer, Make Believe really felt like them trying to do that same reinvention, and I kind of stepped away from the band. And then I sent you all the dates in Discord, Sejin, that's another thing for the production company. It is September 23rd, 2008. And a friend of mine who you know, and from a trip into New Jersey, is like, I don't have anyone to go to the show with me, and I don't have a car. Do you want to go see Weezer? And I'm like, I don't, like, yeah, you're very excited about it, and, you know, I love live music, so we'll do it.
What year was this?
This is 2008. Yep.
Man, I didn't realize Angels and Airwaves existed already. Sorry, go
Yeah,
ahead.
no, that's fine. So like, I don't know.
You want to talk about it? You want to talk about an artist reinventing themselves, right? Tom
Right,
DeLonge
Tom
going from
DeLonge.
Blink-182 to Angels and Airwaves and Boxcar Racer.
Yeah, dude, I had no idea who Angels and Airwaves was. And I'm like, that's Tom DeLonge. But that day, right, it was she had gotten general admission tickets, so she's like, we need to be there early so that we can get good spots. And then that to me, like, I'm like, we're gonna be front and center for this band. We're gonna do it. So we left at like 9 a.m. We went to a Chuck E. Cheese for lunch. And that was before like you needed a kid to go to Chuck E. Cheese. So like two like 20-somethings playing skee ball and eating pizza and just like hanging out with the poor bastards working the lunch shift. We get to Tongass Arena in Lowell, Massachusetts at 1 a.m. and sit there until the doors open. And it is incredible because we're with people with acoustic guitars playing Weezer songs, playing songs like that. And I go see Weezer for the first time live. I am pushed up against the gate. I am as close as I can be to this band. And I watch Cage the Elephant, or no, Tokyo Police Club, sorry, is the opener. And they're like brandy new to the scene. Fall in love immediately. Angels and Airwaves come, and he does this crazy shit where he's like light hands, man, and it's incredible. It's this just incredible situation. And then Weezer comes out, and Weezer to me was a shoegazy, nerdy fucking band, and they come out like they're fucking Queen. Like, Rivers comes down and he's touching my hand, and I'm just like, oh my God, I've been touched by God. It's like, and you're so into it, and then he's crowd surfing, and I'm like, this is nuts. And it's all backing the Red album, right? Which I had not heard. I had never heard the album. And then those songs all come to Rock Band, and then I'm like, all right, this album's great. And I will admit, I got it off of, I don't know, at that time, what was it, Kazaa? LimeWire? I don't know where I got that music from. It wasn't Napster anymore. And that album I fell in love with, which is why I became like a real Weezer head and was buying every album. Raditude, the album that follows the Red album, is probably my second favorite Weezer album because I just spun it for everything that I did in 2009. And 2009 for me, well, it was a bit of a trying year for Devin Decker. Let's just leave it there because we're celebrating the W's, not the L's. And one of those W's was winning a radio contest to see Weezer in Boston in 2009. And not just winning, like, to see them, but to hang out with them in the Snuggie Lounge before the show. And then, one step beyond, one of the 4 winners was going to get to watch the show from the stage and probably perform with the band, but we can't make any promises as the radio station. And Devin Decker was that one. But then, on December 6th, 2009, Weezer was in a bus crash in New York, driving in a blizzard. So that was canceled. But I was very excited to see them, and it didn't work out. And that's just how it happens, and they've recovered from it. But I remember getting the call from the radio station, them being like, so you know how you won these tickets to this show? Well, actually, you won the grand prize, and we'll legally have to tell you that so that whatever we give you is comparable. And I'm like, okay, but at the same time, I'm like, yeah, as soon as I heard they were in a bus accident, I knew that this show wasn't going to happen, but thank you. So that happens. And then I go work on the sea.
What, do they send you, a hat?
I don't think I ever get anything from them, to be completely honest with you. But karma rewarded Devin Decker.
Call the police. I mean, straight up, that sucks, and it's also pretty much illegal. If you win a contest, there's like rules about that shit. Remember those guys with the toy Yodas?
Yes, I do remember the guys with the toy Yodas. I love the audio medium season. So, but karmically, I'm rewarded because I go and I work for Carnival for a year in the wake of that, and everything happens, and I come home for Christmas, and a friend is like, hey, Weezer's playing at the Orpheum Theater in Boston. The first night is the Blue Album. The second night is Pinkerton. I think we should go to one of these shows. This is a completely different friend. I don't think you ever met her. And she's like, we should go to one of them because you didn't get to go hang out with Weezer that
I want to know
one
why I
time.
don't get to meet the cool friend. But anyway, keep going.
She's not, well, then we can talk about that off mic, Sejan.
Never mind. Sorry. You didn't have to say anything.
Oh, but I had to say something, and I can't wait till we're done recording to tell you why. But so I'm like, well, between those two, I'd really like to see them play Pinkerton live. Now, I don't have any huge affinity for that album. I will admit that. But I always wanted to see them do Butterfly live, and they had like just stopped playing that song altogether. Because like whatever, like it's from this, and it had this deeper meaning before. But so she's like, all right, I'll get us tickets for that. She forgets to get us tickets after that conversation. It is December 15th, 2010. She logs on to the Orpheum Theater hoping that there will be tickets available to make good on the I will get us tickets to the show conversation that we had like a month and a half earlier when they went on sale.
Yeah.
There are 2 tickets available. They are front row, center, and they are $90 for the pair. So it's $45 front row center to see Weezer play Pinkerton. In addition to, like, that tour was great. The Memories tour was excellent because they did all the stuff off of Hurley and the other, like, weird sort of cover album that I can't remember the name of right now. They did the Memory stuff. They did older stuff too. And then there was an intermission where they would then come out as if they were Weezer from 1996 performing. And it was incredible because you got that Rivers Cuomo that I saw in 2008, who's crowd surfing in that. I'm talking to members of the band, having a great time. Scott ends up giving me a guitar pick that I still have. I didn't bring it down here because Scott was not in the band for the Blue album, so that would feel rude. But have this incredible experience. And I do have to share one L from that night because it's not my L. It's the guy sitting behind me. And he's like, man, how soon did you get your tickets to be able to be like front row center? And I'm like, oh, we bought them this morning. And he said, you should give me your seat. I'm a bigger Weezer fan than you. Because they had sold for that Memory store like $500 VIP things. And he had that badge. And I'm like, man, it's my ticket. I have the stub. I'm sorry. I'm not going to switch with you because you feel some entitlement to my seat. And yeah, he...
Ticket's a nightmare. I get you, brother, but it's not your fault.
Yeah, exactly, right? But he would not let it go. And the security guard, who was a security guard at the Songus show, who we had worked a couple of events with, you, Sejan, and Devin Decker.
Oh, yeah,
like,
yeah.
So he knew me, right? Because I saw him at Songus. So he's at Orpheum. He ejects the guy from the theater. So he didn't get to see Weezer play the Pinkerton album that he paid $500 to see. And like on some level, I'm just like, I feel like, a little bit bad.
And people have bad nights. Maybe that man's not a bad man, and he just had a bad night. But fuck me, that's a bad night.
I'm like, you know, you don't need. He's like, no, I do, because like he's bothering you, and I don't want it to escalate. I know you're good, Devin, but like he's not letting it go, and he's giving you crap 20 minutes later. I'm kicking him out, and I'm like, you know what? You're right. Your security is what you gotta do. But like his friend afterwards, he's like, I'm sorry about that. I don't know why he was such a jerk about it. But I fully intend to rub in his face that I get to see them play Pinkerton.
I was going to say, that's a good friend, man. Stuck around for Pinkerton. Fuck off. Yeah, no, that's great.
Yeah,
fuck.
It was just like, it was such an electric thing. But then, you know, later, another W, another L, right? Those two shows are like unparalleled, right? It would be very difficult to try to relive those experiences, literally being close enough that you feel the band's breath on you while they're singing. Mm-hmm. But Weezer was such a good show that I'm like, Dale, we should go see them next time they come around. So the next time they come around, it's in Mansfield, Mass. At Great Woods. Call it whatever you want to call it at the time, right? I think now it's the PNC Bake Arts Center, but I don't freaking know. It could be the Xfinity Center. It could be some other, whoever is paying to sponsor Great Woods this season, right? Is what it's going to be called. And it was the most miserable experience ever. We had gotten tickets off of like Groupon. Remember Groupon? It's crazy how Groupon is just kind of lost to the cultural consciousness, right? Like,
well, yeah, like you used to go places and they used to like advertise that they had a Groupon for you to like go pull up and shit. Yeah,
yeah. So
man, I think I still had a couple of like tickets to a spa or something from them. I should look into.
I'm sure I know, but like Groupon, that scam of the week has been replaced by Bitcoin and NFTs and AI and, you know, the monkey that can tell your fortune when you're up his butt.
Groupon wasn't that big of a scam. Like, there were definitely people that were using it to scam, but like, there were plenty of restaurants in Providence that had Groupon pricing that we would use all the time when we were going.
I'm just talking about that it was the scam du jour of the time.
Yeah, it's more akin to Ticketmaster. You are still getting a product at the end that you are using in a way that, like, I would argue something like an NFT, maybe you do not, right?
Right, but it's still that stuff. It's pig butchering, and like most recently, it's the Willy Wonka experience.
Good call.
Right? So it's one of those situations. So the Groupon tickets, they were very affordable, and I'm like, we get to see Weezer, and I understand that, like, Great Woods is Great Woods. It's not going to be the same as these experiences, but like it's one of those bands that if you get the chance, you should see them live. Our seats were basically parallel to the stage, so you didn't have a great view of it. As far back as you can imagine a person sitting and still technically being at Great Woods. And it rained. Also, Panic at the Disco opened for them. So like, you know, and they sang Bohemian Rhapsody.
Nice.
But yeah, I don't like that they cover Bohemian Rhapsody, but that's it. Andrew McMahon was supposed to be there, which was why Dale was like really excited. She's like, I'll get to see Weezer and Andrew McMahon. And then he just didn't show up to that particular performance for some reason.
Okay.
And so it was the same, but Weezer still put on a heck of a show. But I will say, right, putting it into this time capsule, making sure that it's at least somewhere, that kind of killed my drive to go see live music of like not local acts or not like smaller scale stuff. Like the big going to an arena type show. I haven't done that since. Like Soul Asylum was the last band that I've gone to see, and that was at the Wolf's Den at Mohegan Sun. That was like a crazy show.
What killed my drive for large arena shows? The last one I'm pretty sure the last one I ever went to was Kanye.
Okay. Wow.
Yeah. Considering the state of things with the man now, you want to talk about things that have killed your drive to support large live music like that?
I mean, when they started passing out the armband, Siege, and you had to think something was up.
You know, this was just after 808s and Heartbreaks. It was a long time ago, but yeah, boy.
Sorry, I work with the jokes that Kanye provides to me. Sorry. But yeah, and that's kind of disappointing because like there are some bands that I haven't gone to because like the venue was too big, and I'm like, hey, no, I don't want to risk it. Like I have these moments that are incredible, and like they're all tied to Weezer, but I have followed their stuff. Though I gotta say the Africa thing, which was after that performance that I saw in 2016, was kind of like, you know, that Teal album is pretty good. A lot of the songs they chose to cover are songs that I enjoy. Clearly, they're songs that influenced the band to produce the Blue album that has brought us here today for this time capsule episode. But at the end of the day, I'm like, you know, I don't know how I feel about Weezer anymore, right? I didn't listen to any of the Seasons EPs. The Black Album or Van Weezer, like those are both ones that I'm aware of, but I haven't listened to. So I'm glad that they've been a part of my life. This album specifically is one that really matters to me. You know what? I'm not super happy that I saw that cover band, The Blue Album. There was a Rhode Island Weezer cover band called The Blue Album. That
you're reaching down to the bottom of your list, aren't you, bud?
Well, I mean, like, no, there's lower than that, but those are definitive L's that I don't want to bring into what has been a pretty positive episode, right? At the end of the day, I love this album. I'm so happy that like 30 years later, I can talk about it. I can still learn new things about it and everything like that. I mean, Suzanne's still going to be like top. Then like probably Troublemaker. Troublemaker is one of those songs that I love off the Red album. And then it'd probably be something off of Gratitude. But like for reasons that I don't want to talk about on a podcast. Personal reasons.
Yeah, I'm
Loving
gonna go back. I'm gonna go
reads.
and dig up my Mallrats soundtrack that I have running here somewhere.
Awesome, fantastic. I mean, yeah, I mean, well, you'll if you've this if this time capsule lasts long enough, you'll see why that'll be important, or you've already seen why that'll be important. Wibbly wobbly, timey wimey, bumba bumba. Is there anything else that you want to say about this album, though, Sejin, before we put this one
Just
into the
just
hermetically
out of
sealed,
curiosity,
or
like I know we talked about the three songs, the three or four
the three
songs that are
covers, the three
considered big
singles?
off of this. The
Yeah.
three singles that are really considered like the big hits off of the song, single or otherwise. But like for you, what are your three? Like if you had to pick three songs out of this, it's a dumb question because how do we like water it down that much? But I am just curious.
So in the garage, Surf Wax America. That song just it's a surprise every time, and I love it. And then honestly, even knowing what I know about it now, and that like it is that where it brings me to in my life, no one else like that idea
Yeah.
of like knowing what your ideal is and then understanding that like yeah but reality is going to come into the picture.
Well,
It's
and
unfortunate
we
that
didn't
people
talk
don't
about
come there,
yeah,
but like
right, and out of not wanting to focus on it too much, I didn't really drag out the conversation on it. But I mean, the other thing to be said about No One Else is that it is also harkening back to a style of music like the 50s, 60s,
yeah
right?
it
In the
is.
lyrics, right? So there's also something to be said about that. Again, that doesn't forgive it for
That
being
does
creepy as
not
hell
give it a
now, but
pass at
like
all. But
but this idea that but there is something to be said about like, what what he is trying to do is something different than what necessarily the lyrics convey, but like what 14-year-old kid picking up this album back in 1994 thought that, right?
yeah, exactly. It's I don't know. Yeah, so I think it would be in that order: In the Garage, Surfwax US, Surfwax America, and then No One Else.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, it's hard for me to kind of put them in an order, but like, say it ain't so. I say it ain't so, Buddy Holly and Undone for me. Like my
that
name is Jonas will always be that kind of song for me that like that I love, but I never remember it as being on the Blue album. But if I listen to Say It Ain't So, if I listen to Buddy Holly, if I listen to Undone, I instantly think of this whole album and everything that comes with it, right? So like my name is it's weird because like if I had to pick my favorite song off the album, I might say My Name is Jonas, but if I had to pick what are my three Blue album songs, like it's definitely those three.
yeah, I mean, My Name is Jonas. It almost doesn't count. It's like it's
It
the
almost doesn't count,
greatest
right?
song. It's such a perfect introduction to everything. And then
Yeah.
it's like, and then here's the other songs. Like obviously this is the medal winner, and then here are the other guys who like placed in the
Yeah.
race. I don't know. It's I mean like Buddy Holly. I've been told, oh, you look just like Buddy Holly anytime Weezer comes up or I'm at a Weezer show because I got the glasses and I get that. I understand that.
This is the song that introduced me to Buddy Holly.
Yeah.
Not introduced me to. I shouldn't put it that way. It was one of those things where my parents listened to the oldie station. I had known what a Buddy Holly song was in retrospect, but it wasn't until this song that I was like, who's Buddy Holly? And then I was like, oh, he's the guy that sings this song. Okay. So like got me like on that bandwagon, right? Like yeah, straight up. That song did that for me. And that's actually again another huge part of how this kind of shaped like my taste in music and stuff.
Tracks. I totally get that. I mean, that bridge on Buddy Holly is incredible. I love that bridge. And the fact that Spike Jones in the video for it is like, we're gonna to be continued right before that bridge. You've heard the song before you've seen the video. Very like there's a better chance that you know the song before you've seen that video. And that like to be continued right before it, you want to punch Spike Jones right in the face. And then I also like Say It Ain't So. That the background of that is hilarious. That like Rivers, when he was 4, thought that his parents were getting a divorce because his father was an alcoholic. Because as a 4-year-old, he misinterpreted things that he overheard. Like what a crazy background to a song.
Yeah, nope, fucking nuts. I mean, like, yeah, he's a weird dude, and
Yeah.
and like the ways in which he spins it into pop hits, like, is pretty wild.
Yeah.
I mean, like, yeah, Say It Ain't So is forever. Well, Say It Ain't So on its own will forever be the Blue album and Rock Band to me because, man, oof.
Yeah, but
Say
then
It Ain't
again,
So and Danny California were like my go-to songs. Remember when I lived in that house
yes.
on the beach in college? Like, yeah, man.
Oh, that place, right? See, Sejin's got stuff too that we will talk about after the recording. It's not just Devin bringing it to the party. But even then, like, we talk about Rock Band and Say It and So and all that. Like, it was on the demo. Like, that was the real big thing about it. The demo at Walmart, which we went to go play at midnight at one of the, like, midnight Walmarts. All you could play was Say It Ain't So. So it was like this cool moment. But before Rock Band was even a glimmer in Harmonix's eyes, like Guitar Hero 3 had My Name is Jonas as like the encore song of the first set list. Like, think about that. It might have been like the fourth set list. Yeah, right. I've been thinking about that a lot because of all the Weezer time I put in. Like, all the Red album stuff that came out to Rock Band, all the Blue album stuff. Doing El Scorcho was just fun as shit. It was a good time. I don't know. I mean, I love Weezer. It is one of those situations where if a Weezer song is on, I'm always going to give it a shot. I mean, they did the fucking song for Bill and Ted 3 Face the Music. Right? Mm-hmm. Like, think about that. Like, yeah, Weezer was good enough to, like, be the band behind the song. For that movie.
I mean, and that bookends very nicely with exactly what I said in the beginning. Is like, yeah, they are the band that you call because every band out there loves this band, right? Like, to be the guys that play the band in Bill and Ted. Yes, of course it's Weezer, right?
All right. So if there's nothing else from you, just a little bit of housekeeping. I'll do it brief. This has been a time cap.
Wait. It does occur to me that. Did we talk about the fact that it's because they have an existing relationship with Keanu Reeves? Like, that is part of it.
Oh, that's part of it. I mean, you brought up Dave Grohl, so there's that whole thing.
Well, like, this specifically with Dogstar, Keanu Reeves' band, they have a history with them, which is part of the reason that they are there. But also because I'm sure if anybody else asked, nobody would complain that Weezer was the band in Bill and Ted.
Right, exactly. I mean, when Kiss was the band in Bill and Ted too, and that worked for me when God gave rock and roll to you. But then Face the Music being by Weezer and Bill and Ted Face the Music, I think we all understood it, right? It's not Big Pig from Bill and Ted. I want to break away. God, I love the Bill and Ted movies. That's up for a rewatch for me. Different episode. Sorry. So this has been a time capsule episode of the Say Report. We tried to focus on the 30th anniversary of Weezer, Blue album. But you know what these are, they try to exist out of space and time in case there's a time where we're unable to fulfill our duties as Say reporters to you, the listener. We have these in the chamber to release to you, sort of like the first runner-up at Miss Universe or Miss America or any beauty pageant, and that's all we're going to say about beauty pageants.
I don't understand why you said that or why. Really.
I just want people to understand.
Sometimes thoughts don't need to be recorded.
That's true, right? But the fact of the matter is, this was recorded back in February. Hopefully you're listening to this after May of 2024. I always like to tempt fate in these.
After Devin has won Miss Universe.
I think I'd be a good Miss Universe. I'd be fair to all the smaller planets. Pluto's going to get healthcare again if I'm elected Miss Universe, right?
Okay, there's so many things about what you're saying that we need to talk about off mic.
I think I've aged out of eligibility is the saddest part about anything we're going to say on it. But yes, so it is a time capsule episode, but that doesn't mean that we don't want to talk to you about everything that we just said in this. So if you have any thoughts about anything we said about Weezer, if you want to tell us that we're just flat out wrong about anything we reported, you can send an email to thesayreport@gmail.com, or you can always join us in the Discord, which I recently found out, right? This is fun to reveal because it's not going to be revealed till later on down the line. How to do a permanent invite to the Discord. So I bet if you go to anywhere that we are on the socials, you can find a link to join our Discord. And please do. It's steadily growing. We're having some fun there. And we're going to have a production meeting about how time capsules are going to fit into what's going on there.
You have the date that we recorded this. If you go back to that date, there's a little Easter egg waiting for you.
Yeah, that's true. Don't tell Mom. I kid. But yes, so thank you so much for listening. Episodes are every Monday of the Say Report, and we do stuff like this for the time capsule ones, like fun anniversaries, things that will not age out poorly the way that Alexander Inc. did. I think it was just Alex Inc. You know what? I've said enough. Anything else from you, Siegen, before we give this one to Will to hermetically seal until necessary?
Does that mean the full name of his company was Alexander Incorporated?
That's what I like to think of it. I mean, the show was Alex Inc. I think his name was just Alex. I think he was one of those people who, like, my parents named me Alex, not Alexander. Did you ever meet anybody like that?
I don't know. I was kind of hoping Frustrated Incorporated would start playing, and we would go. We'd the credits.
Will, bring us
What
home.
song is that?
What? That's Misery by Soul Asylum.
Thank you.
Yeah. Bye. Will, take us home.
Thank you for listening to the Say Report with your host Devin Decker and Siegen Serwick. Please follow the guys on Twitter and Facebook by searching for The Say Report, and you can always subscribe on your podcast channel so this is delivered straight to you and you can enjoy it every week. With apologies to your mother, we'll see you next time.